Hey everybody, so here's the next installment in the top 10 favorite films from each letter of the alphabet, and today is the letter F. So most of these you could probably guess already, but there might be one or two in there that may surprise you, at least a little bit. So first up is actually Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and this was one that I went back and forth on whether I was going to include it on the list, but the fact of the matter is, I have watched this film so many times throughout my life, and it's one of those where I think because it's so funny, but at the same time there is kind of a raw honesty to it. So if anything, just for the rewatchability aspect of it for me, I mean, I decided just to leave it on the list. Next up is David Cronenberg's The Fly, and this and Videodrome, I seem to go back and forth as to which one is actually my favorite David Cronenberg film. And The Fly for me is just an amazing film because I think it also shows what you can do with a horror film that you can't always do in other films, even as a drama. I mean, if this was a film that basically had to do with a couple who meets and falls in love, and one of them comes down with like cancer, let's say, or something, and they deteriorate, and it affects their relationship and everything, that would be an effective film. But how many of us would watch it like 100 times? But instead, you change it where instead of let's say cancer or something, he turns into a giant fly. It's like, well, yeah, that's, even though it's the exact same story, you just add that aspect to it, and all of a sudden I'm watching it over and over again, so. But that's also, for me, part of the genius of David Cronenberg, too. Next up, we'll come to a surprise to none of you, and that is John Carpenter's The Fog. As I mentioned before, The Fog holds a very special place for me because it was one of those early horror films that I saw as a kid that really made me really fall in love with the horror genre. So The Fog was definitely going to be on this list. Next up is Sergio Leone's For a Few Dollars More. My personal favorite of the trilogy, the infamous trilogy, For a Few Dollars More really just speaks to me. And it's also one that I think probably had the most influence on me from any Western, really. Probably that and The Wild Bunch, actually. Next up is Todd Browning's Freaks, and it's a film that I absolutely adore and have seen so many times in my life, including a couple times on the big screen. I was lucky enough to see some 35mm prints of it over the years. And I think one of the special things about Freaks is the fact that I think, especially us as horror fans, I think we can almost relate to the fact of feeling a little bit of an outcast in general, but finding solidarity among people like ourselves, other fans and stuff. And I think also getting very protective and defensive when someone attacks the genre or the fandom or a fan specifically. And just in general, I think the film is just incredible. I mean, like I said, I've seen it so many times. Every time Turner Classic Movies shows it, I always watch it. Next up is Friday the 13th, but I wasn't sure actually which one I was going to put, and I didn't want to put all of them or some of my favorite ones specifically because I would have been most of the list for F, and I could pretty much do a whole video on my listing of all the Jason movies. And originally I was going to put the original Friday the 13th down and just have that represent sort of all of them since I'm a huge fan. But then I was like, you know what? I'm actually going to go with The Final Chapter. So that is actually my pick for this one because it is the one that I think actually is my personal favorite of all of them. So I'm going to go with The Final Chapter, but just know that it does actually represent all of them for me. Another one that will come to no surprise to anyone, and that is Fright Night, my favorite vampire film, and a film I love so much. I've talked about it in tons of other videos. I'm not going to gush over it anymore. You guys know how much I love it. And if you don't know, I love it. So I'm a massive, massive fan of Fright Night. So obviously that needed to be on the list. Next up is Peter Jackson's The Frighteners, a film that I think is, even as much as it has a fandom, I still think it is completely underrated. In fact, actually, I watched it not too long ago. It was just a couple months ago. And God, it still holds up. I mean, oh man, just love that film. Next up is William Friedkin's The French Connection, another one that I've always loved, but has definitely gone up my list over the years. Actually, The Exorcist used to be my favorite Friedkin film, and actually used to be even one of my favorite films. But now The French Connection is actually one of my, not only my favorite William Friedkin film, but one of my favorite films. It's actually, for me, it's in my top 10. I mean, I love that film, so I can't tell you how many times I've watched that film over the years. I mean, that's obviously a common thing. All these films I love are ones that I watch over and over and over again. Hell, I've even watched French Connection on my iPad on a plane, you know? That's how much I love it. And then finally, the last one on the list for the Fs is A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, a musical comedy that I absolutely love to no end, and it's one that I think is so hilarious, and I love the songs, and for me is so rewatchable, and is filled with so many amazing lines that I use in my daily life on a regular basis, whether you know it or not. So for sure, that had to be on this top 10 list for me. So keep an eye out for the next one, which obviously be the letter G. Got some interesting ones on there. In fact, I still need to finalize that list. So let me know your 10 picks for the letter F. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.